What if I told you that one off-the-cuff remark from Donald Trump has now exploded into a $100 million legal battle? What if I told you that the man standing toe-to-toe with Trump is not a billionaire businessman or a Washington insider, but a young African leader who has built his reputation on defiance, sovereignty, and refusing to bow before the West? Tonight, we're talking about Ibrahim Traoré, the fiery captain who rose from the barracks to the presidency of Burkina Faso, and how a single Trump insult 17 seconds long triggered a storm no one saw coming. Donald Trump has always been known for his words sharp, unfiltered, and often nuclear in impact. Whether you love him or hate him, you know one thing: Trump doesn't pull punches. His verbal grenades have targeted everyone from American journalists to NATO allies. But this time, his target was unexpected. Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old revolutionary who has become a symbol of Africa's new era of anti-colonial defiance. It started during a private fundraiser that quickly leaked into the media. Trump, addressing a room full of wealthy donors, mocked Traoré as a toy soldier president, suggesting that Burkina Faso was nothing more than, quote, a patch of dirt pretending to be a country. Those words were caught on a hot mic, and within hours, they spread across the internet like wildfire. To the Western elite, maybe it was just another Trumpism, loud, brash, exaggerated. But in Ouagadougou, those words were nuclear. Because to understand why Traoré's reaction was so immediate and so fierce, you need to understand the man himself. Ibrahim Traoré is not your typical head of state. He's not the product of Ivy League schools or think tank grooming. He's a soldier, a patriot forged in fire, who took power during a time when his country was drowning under terror attacks and suffocating under the shadow of French influence. While the world expected him to be just another transitional figure, Traoré stunned everyone. He declared war on Western exploitation, kicked out French troops, and realigned Burkina Faso with Russia and other emerging powers. To many Africans, he is a hero, a modern-day Sankara reborn. To Western capitals, he's dangerous, unpredictable, and unwilling to play by their rules. So when Trump, a man who himself built his brand on defiance of the establishment, chose to insult him, the irony was not lost. This wasn't just an insult to one man, it was an insult to a movement, to a generation that sees in Traoré a chance to finally stand tall. And Traoré knew it. 17 seconds after Trump's words hit social media, Traoré's legal team filed notice in U.S. courts, lawsuit for defamation, valued at $100 million. The speed of the response shocked even seasoned observers. This wasn't politics as usual. This was legal war. But why a lawsuit? Why not just a fiery speech, a rallying cry, or a diplomatic protest? The answer is strategy. Traoré understands the modern battlefield. Yes, he commands troops on the ground. Yes, he speaks to millions on television. But he also knows that in today's world, legal warfare using the enemy's own system against them is just as powerful as tanks and rifles. By dragging Trump into a U.S. courtroom, he wasn't just defending his personal honor. He was flipping the script. He was forcing America to look at itself in the mirror. Because here's the deeper truth. This lawsuit isn't just about Trump and Traoré. It's about the larger clash between the old world order and the new, between nations that have long exploited Africa and leaders who are finally saying, enough. For decades, African leaders were expected to remain silent in the face of Western mockery. They were told to know their place. The IMF dictated their budgets. The World Bank dictated their priorities. And Western media dictated their reputations. But Traoré is different. He's part of a generation that refuses to bow. By filing a lawsuit, he was sending a message not just to Trump, but to the entire Western establishment. If you disrespect us, there will be consequences. Almost immediately, the lawsuit became a rallying cry across the continent. African social media lit up with hashtags defending Traoré, mocking Trump and calling for a broader African resistance. Crowdfunding campaigns began popping up not because Traoré needed the money, but because ordinary citizens wanted to show solidarity. In Nigeria, in Mali, in South Africa, young people began chanting his name. Suddenly, Traoré wasn't just the president of Burkina Faso. He was becoming the face of African dignity in the 21st century. Meanwhile, Trump's camp dismissed the lawsuit as frivolous. His lawyers argued that it was nothing more than a publicity stunt. But here's where things got messy. US courts couldn't simply ignore it. Because unlike political insults thrown inside America, this one had crossed borders, targeting a sitting foreign head of state. International law suddenly entered the picture. Diplomatic immunity, sovereign respect. Foreign relations, every legal scholar in Washington was suddenly weighing in. And every media outlet, mainstream or alternative, was forced to cover the clash. And that's exactly what Traore wanted. Remember, this is a man who thrives on symbolism. Every move he makes is designed to send a message. When he wears military fatigues instead of suits, it's a message. When he addresses his people in their own languages instead of French, it's a message. And now, by suing Trump for $100 million, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was forcing the world to acknowledge his country, his people, his vision. Legally speaking, defamation cases are notoriously difficult, especially when they involve public figures. Trump's lawyers would argue it was just political rhetoric, opinion-protected speech, and maybe they'd win. But in truth, winning in court was never Traore's primary goal. The lawsuit itself was the weapon. The headlines, the debates, the global conversation that was the victory. Because in those headlines, Trump was no longer the billionaire mogul punching down. He was now the defendant, facing off against a young African leader who refused to be mocked. The insult was supposed to diminish Traore. Instead, it elevated him. The insult was supposed to show Africa's weakness. Instead, it highlighted its strength. And as the story continued to spread, it began raising deeper questions. Who gets to define dignity in international politics? Why is it acceptable for Western leaders to ridicule others, but unacceptable when the tables are turned? And most importantly, what does this mean for the future of global power? Leaders like Traore are not going away. They are multiplying. Across Africa, Latin America, and even parts of Asia, a new generation is rising, leaders who are unapologetic, nationalistic, and unwilling to play by Western rules. They may not have the economic firepower of the United States, but they have something far more dangerous: the loyalty of their people and the symbolism of defiance. And in that clash, every insult, every remark, every slip of the tongue becomes a battlefield. Trump may have thought his words would vanish into the endless noise of political commentary, but 17 seconds later, he learned a hard truth. In the age of global defiance, words are weapons, and Ibrahim Traoré was ready to fire back. Now the lawsuit was just the opening shot. Within weeks, the case began dominating headlines not just in African media, but worldwide. Western commentators were baffled. Why was a small, landlocked country like Burkina Faso challenging one of the most powerful political figures on earth? But in Africa, the answer was clear. It wasn't about size. It was about pride. Traoré doubled down. He gave fiery speeches reminding the world of Africa's colonial scars. He spoke of nations carved apart by European empires, of resources looted, of leaders assassinated when they dared to stand tall. And then he asked the question no one in Washington wanted to hear. Why is it still acceptable in 2025 for Africa to be mocked and ridiculed? That question hit like a thunderclap. While the Western media tried to laugh off the lawsuit, millions of young Africans didn't find it funny. For them, Trump's words were not just an insult. To one man, they were an insult to every African who has ever been told their country doesn't matter. And Traoré's response was not just legal, it was emotional, symbolic, revolutionary. Suddenly, political analysts began warning of a Traoré effect. That effect was simple. Every time a Western leader tried to dismiss Africa, they risked fueling a wave of anti-Western sentiment. Every insult became gasoline, poured on a fire that was already burning. The fire spread. Burkina Faso's allies, Mali and Niger, quickly rallied behind Traoré. They issued joint statements condemning Trump's words, framing them as proof that the West still saw Africa as inferior. Russia, eager to capitalize on the moment, offered legal expertise and diplomatic backing. China quietly applauded from the sidelines, seeing opportunity in every crack that appeared between Africa and the West. Meanwhile, in the United States, the lawsuit became political dynamite. Trump's opponents used it to paint him as reckless and irresponsible. His supporters dismissed it as foreign meddling. But either way, the case kept his name in the headlines exactly where Trump thrives, but also exactly where his enemies wanted him, under scrutiny. Trump built his empire on branding. Every controversy, every scandal, Every insult he spun them into fuel for his political machine. But this time, he wasn't facing the usual American rivals. He wasn't facing Joe Biden, Ron DeSantis, or CNN. He was facing a young African leader who couldn't be controlled, couldn't be intimidated, and couldn't be ignored. That's what made it dangerous. Because Traore wasn't playing by US political rules. He wasn't trying to win votes in Iowa or curry favor with lobbyists in DC. He was playing a global game. Every time Trump dismissed him, Traore grew stronger in the eyes of Africans. Every legal motion, every courtroom headline, every fiery speech, it all built the image of a leader who dared to challenge the most outspoken man in American politics. Thomas Sankara once said, "He who feeds you controls you." Traore grew up with those words carved into his consciousness. Now in 2025, he was proving another truth. He who mocks you underestimates you. Trump underestimated him, and that underestimation became Traore's weapon. But what about the money? $100 million. That number wasn't chosen at random. Legal experts noted that it was symbolic. $100 million represented roughly the annual GDP contribution of Burkina Faso's gold exports resources long, extracted by Western corporations with little benefit to the people. By demanding that figure, Traore was essentially saying, "You've taken from us for decades. Now we demand it back." To Trump's camp, it was outrageous. To Africans, it was poetic justice. And so, as the lawsuit dragged on, the real trial wasn't happening in a courtroom. It was happening in the court of global public opinion. Who would emerge as the symbol of strength? The billionaire ex-president of the United States, or the young captain-turned-president of Burkina Faso? For months, the battle raged on. Legal motions flew back and forth. Analysts debated endlessly. But one thing was clear: no matter the outcome, Ibrahim Traoré had already won something more valuable than money. He had won visibility. He had forced his country, his people, his struggle into the spotlight of the global stage. This clash wasn't isolated. It was part of a much larger shift. Across the global south, leaders are tired of being spoken down to. They're tired of being told to wait their turn. They're tired of being seen as pawns in a game played between Washington, Brussels, Moscow, and Beijing. Traoré's lawsuit wasn't just about Trump. It was about rewriting the script. It was about telling the world, Africa will not be mocked, ignored, or dismissed. We will fight back, even in your own courts. Even if Trump wins in court, even if the lawsuit is thrown out, Traoré still wins in the hearts of millions. Because in the end, this was never about legal technicalities. It was about dignity. It was about pride. It was about one young leader refusing to let his people be disrespected. That's why this story matters. That's why it will be remembered. Because history isn't written only by armies and treaties. Sometimes it's written by words. And sometimes by the lawsuits that follow those words. When a billionaire mogul with decades of power mocks a young African captain, the script should be predictable. The billionaire laughs. The captain stays silent. The world moves on, but not this time. This time the captain fought back. And in doing so, he reminded the world of a truth too often forgotten. Respect is not given by the powerful. It is demanded by the brave. If you believe this story exposes more than just a feud, if you believe it reveals the deeper struggle over respect, sovereignty, and dignity, then let your voice be heard. Drop a comment below. Do you think Traoré was right to fire back with a lawsuit? Or do you think Trump's words were just political noise? Share this video with your friends, because conversations like this deserve to spread beyond the walls of mainstream media. And if you want to keep hearing raw, unfiltered truths about global politics that others are too afraid to cover, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because the battle for dignity is just getting started. And here, we won't let you miss a single moment.